58,000 Americans were killed in the Vietnam War. In 2018 alone, over 67,000 were killed by drug overdoses. In 2017, it was over 70,000. In 2016, over 63,000. The war on drugs is a Vietnam War every year. Most of these staggering numbers have been driven by what's become known as the North American Opioid Crisis.
Narrowed it down to literally 2 overdoses a month. And the rate I'm going, I may not see 32.
But how did we get here? How did a toxic mix of the war on drugs and a profit-driven medical system get us to a place where overdoses now kill more Americans than gunshots or road accidents? America has had a heroin problem for decades, but around 2010, something changed, shifting it from a national problem to an epidemic. Opiates have always been used for pain relief, and fair enough. No one wants to go through an operation without morphine. But because they're potentially addictive, traditionally these drugs were tightly controlled. Doctors would keep a close eye to make sure their patients weren't becoming dependent. But then, in the 1990s, researchers at a pharmaceutical company spotted an opportunity. They began pushing the idea that opioid pain medication was actually much less addictive than previously thought. And why were these companies so desperate to convince doctors that they could prescribe far more powerful opioid medications? Because there were billions and billions of dollars to be made. Pharmaceutical companies began sending sales reps across the US and Canada, aggressively marketing much stronger opioid pain medication to doctors. The market leaders in this, though by no means the only ones at it, were Purdue Pharma, pushing their shiny new pill, OxyContin.
So I used to call on a doctor in this corner suite right here. And so I started calling on him on a frequent basis and talking to him about OxyContin. He started writing OxyContin.
They were wildly successful. Between 1997 and 2002, prescriptions for OxyContin increased from 670,000 to 6.2 million.
Playing football, I had an awesome year. And the game before the playoffs, I tore my knee. I just had a fucking doctor that wanted to give me all these pills. I kept going back to the dude and he was giving me, you know, whatever. He said these 5s aren't working right. I need something stronger. So he gives me 7.5s and some Dilaudid.
By the time opioid prescribing peaked in 2012, 255 million prescriptions were written. In over 10% of US counties, enough opioid prescriptions were written for every single citizen to have one. But there was a problem. If you hand out hundreds of millions of opioid pills, a lot of people are going to get addicted. Since its very beginning, the drug war has been targeted at ethnic minorities and the poor. But now, with opioid prescribing, millions of people were getting addicted in white suburban neighborhoods.
I'm 39, I grew up in Quincy, and people I used to play sports with, and some people I used to hang out with, a lot of them, started on the OxyContin, on the Percocet, and ended up becoming heroin addicts. And I've lost track now, but it's over 25 people that are no longer with us. They're deceased. And it wasn't just people that were coming from tough backgrounds. It was people that had good families, and they played sports, and they hung out with good people, and now are dead.
Back in 2010, authorities began cracking down on doctors in Florida who'd been overprescribing opioids. So, millions of people who'd become dependent on these medicines were suddenly cut off by their doctors. And this is where the true opioid crisis really begins. The greatest myth of the opioid epidemic is that the whole thing was caused by overprescribing. But it's not a true crisis until you add the war on drugs. Those addicted patients didn't just stop needing the drugs because their prescriptions ran out. So millions of them turned to the black market and started buying heroin. Inevitably, some of those users started dying. This is the point on the graph where heroin deaths begin to climb. Now, if there'd been suitable treatment options available, this crisis might have been averted, or at least eased. But unfortunately, authorities in both the US and Canada chose to deal with it the same way they've tried to deal with drug addiction for a century, as a war.
There's really 2 ways that people try to deal with opioid addiction. One is to try to basically get people to a point where they are completely abstinent of any kind of opioid in their body. The problem with abstinence-only treatment is that it doesn't really deal with the biology of addiction. The fact that people's brain changes after they've been using opioids for long amounts of time. And so even if people have all the right motivations and desires to change, they still have to deal with this biological change in their body. Opioid medications, methadone and buprenorphine in particular, address that biological craving without giving people the experience of euphoria. And medication treatment is absolutely the gold standard for treating opioid addiction. They cut overdose risk in half compared to abstinence-only treatment. There has become this mentality that taking these medications is substituting one addiction for another. Drugs are bad, and the best way to be free of drugs is to completely be abstinent of anything. So it's this just say no mentality.
Just say no. Just say no.
Just say no. Just say no.
Denying drug users effective treatment might seem cruel and arbitrary, not to mention self-defeating, seeing how catastrophic results have been. But in fact, it goes to the very heart of what the war on drugs really is. That urge to dehumanize drug users, to punish rather than support them, no matter the consequences, has defined the drug war since its very beginning. And there's perhaps no clearer illustration of this than the debates around Naloxone.
So Naloxone is the antidote for an opiate overdose. So what happens when somebody overdoses on an opiate? The part of your brain that tells your lungs to breathe turns off. So you're gonna draw up the contents of this, pop it into the thigh. By that time, hopefully emergency help will have arrived and you've bought the person a lot of time.
Naloxone, or Narcan, is a drug that can save people from an opiate overdose almost instantly.
It's like magic. I mean, it's essentially like it's bringing someone back to life and giving them another chance, saving the lives of people who deserve a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh chance.
Narcan is easy to use. It can mean the difference between life and death. And yet there are police forces across America that actively resist even carrying it.
To administer the Narcan, you have to get down on your knees. You have to take your eyes off of who you're administering this to. And these people, for the most part, don't like the police.
I wanted the word to get out that you don't want to come to Middletown to have an overdose because we might not respond.
That was Sheriff Richard Jones and Councilman Dan Pickard from Butler County, Ohio. In 2017, when they made those statements, overdoses killed more people in Butler County than all other causes combined.
I'd be dead if it wasn't for Narcan. When I relapsed, I OD'd like the third time I got high. And I almost didn't make it. I don't want to live like this. This is terrible.
What it does is it saves lives, and that's sort of the bottom line, People are gonna relapse and get high, maybe need it more than once. It's a part of recovery, it's a part of addiction, people going back out there. If there wasn't Narcan available, I wouldn't be here. And not only, would I not be here, but my mother would be without a son.
We've seen how pharma companies made billions getting people hooked on opioids. And we've seen how millions of people were driven from oxy onto heroin. But in fact, the true horror of the opioid crisis had not yet even begun. Enter fentanyl.
Most people working in addiction were expecting that heroin would make a comeback when OxyContin went away. And that's the worst that I think most of us saw coming. We didn't expect fentanyl to come.
Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid around 50 times stronger than heroin. 2 milligrams can be fatal. From around 2014, this nightmare drug began flooding into the US and Canada as dealers saw an incredibly cheap and easy way to cut their heroin supply.
When we say that fentanyl is 100 times as toxic as morphine, what we're saying is that a pound of fentanyl is the same as 100 pounds of morphine, or about 50 pounds of heroin. So if you're a drug trafficker, you can move 1 million doses of fentanyl in a shoebox.
It's fentanyl and other ultra-powerful synthetic opioids that have triggered the astronomical spike in overdose deaths across North America.
From 2015 to 2017, we've tripled our fentanyl seizures across the country.
In 2017, in New York City alone, the DEA seized 193 kilos of fentanyl. That's enough to kill the city's entire population 11 times over. And it just gets scarier. The explosion of fentanyl has been followed by an influx of carfentanil, which is 100 times stronger.
in that 1 gram, that's actually 50,000 fatal overdoses.
50,000. That's a city.
So where does that leave us? The data hasn't yet come in, but early reports said that the COVID-19 pandemic has made the opioid crisis even worse. Overdose deaths are expected to break 70,000 this year. Purdue Pharma is being sued by over 2,000 American cities, counties, and Native American territories for its part in creating the crisis. Purdue have reportedly offered to settle those cases, and in 2019 they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. But that's a small consolation for the victims of this battle in the war on drugs. Every 15 minutes, a baby is born in America addicted to opioids. Every day, 128 Americans die of an opioid overdose. Experts project opioids will kill over 500,000 people in the US over the next decade. That's about 1 in every 600 of the population. Unless there's a radical change of policy, this is likely to get worse before it gets better.
We'd like to congratulate drugs for winning the war on drugs.